Good evening, everyone. So last week we finished Exodus, and we see Moses finishing up at Sinai, and they have the Ten Commandments. They've gotten past the golden calf, and now we're ready to move in. So today we're going to do the book of Numbers, and we're going to touch very lightly on Leviticus, because Leviticus is just mostly rules. And while there is actually, sometimes people skip it because it seems boring because it's rules, there's actually super interesting stuff in there. But we're going to skip it for now because I want to focus on the story of them continuing to journey to the promised land. And so for the book of Numbers, again, terrible name. It begins with the census, which is why it's called that. But book of Numbers is really, a lot of the Exodus story is in there. If Exodus is A New Hope, Star Wars, the first one, this is Empire Strikes Back, because this is them in the desert, wandering around, keep on messing up and doubting, and there's a lot of murmuring and rioting and rebelling against God, and then Moses has to go and figure it out, and there's all sorts of good stuff. And so some of those stories we most associate with Exodus are actually in Numbers. But we're going to start in Leviticus, and we're going to start on, let me see where I get it, chapter 9 in Leviticus. And this is the priesthood of Aaron. So on the 8th day, Moses summoned Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a bull calf for the sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering without blemish, and offer them to the Lord. And say to the people of Israel, take a male goat for a sin offering, a calf and a lamb, yearling without blemish, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for an offering of well-being to sacrifice before the Lord, and a grain offering mixed with oil. For today the Lord will appear to you." They brought what Moses commanded to the front of the tent of the meeting, and the whole congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. And Moses said, "This is the thing that the Lord commanded you to do, so that the glory of the Lord may appear to you." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Draw near to the altar and sacrifice your sin offerings and your burnt offerings, and make atonement for yourself and for the people, and the sacrifice offerings for them, as the Lord commanded." I'm going to skip down to 15. Next, he presented the people's offerings. He took the goat and the sin offerings that he for the people and slaughtered it and presented it to the sin offerings like the first one. He presented the burnt offerings and the sacrificial and sacrificed it according to the regulations. He presented the grain offering, taking a handful of it and turned into smoke on the altar in addition to the burnt offerings of the morning. So we're seeing now the chapter before in 8 is his ordination. We see Moses anoint him with oil and garb him in the priestly garb. And this is the establishment of the Levitical priesthood. Up until now, all the tribes were kind of considered priests in themselves, especially the firstborn son. So the firstborn son was kind of the priest of the household, and he would offer sacrifice. Again, we saw this in the Passover, that when they passed over, they all sacrificed their own lamb. We're now seeing a shift to the establishment of the Levitical priesthood. So in Israel, you have the 12 tribes, and the Levites are the priestly tribe, and they'll take on a special role within Israel. They don't get land like everyone else. They live dispersed amongst all the other tribes, and they have a special kind of status as the priestly tribe. And the priests that will serve at the temple come from Leviticus. And so the people still have a certain priestly role, and this is kind of going to be the establishment of, or not the establishment, but it's the same divide we have kind of in the modern world, where we'll see there's the divide between the laity and the clergy, and this is kind of the first establishment of that, whereas like, okay, this group is set aside. Now this one is set aside through ancestry. You have to be a tribe of Levite. Of course, in the modern world, we have men who choose to become part of the priesthood, and that's how they're kind of set aside. But there is going to be, we're going to say in Numbers, that this causes a lot of tension, and that this is the same tension that we see in the development of Protestantism, which doesn't make the same divide with their ministers. Ministers isn't seen as a sacrament in most of the churches, and so it's this always divide of like, okay, well, everyone's called to holiness, and of course, but do we have these people who can be set apart in this special way, and how does that play out, and how does the relationship between them and the rest of the people play out? And we'll see that is one of the tensions we'll see. And we'll see in chapter 10, Nadab and Abihu, his sons, are also made priests, and then it goes from them. And now not every male in the Levites are priests, but all priests comes from the Levites. So I just wanted to read that to establish that we now have the establishment of the Levite priesthood, which is an important step in the development of Judaism. So we're now going to go ahead and we're going to go to Numbers. And so Numbers is called Numbers because it begins with a census. And it actually begins on kind of a high point. And we're not going to read it all because it's very repetitive, but in a very ceremonial way. Numbers is kind of read as a ceremony itself. So you start with the census taking, okay, we're leaving Mount Sinai, we're heading towards the Promised Land, and let's do a numbering of all we have. And so they have numbers for all of the men of fighting age, and that's an important one because they're setting up basically as an army of the Lord. You know, we're the church militant today and the communion of saints. So this idea is still present in our church today. And so we see they count each one. And so each one so Simeon has 59,000, Gad 45,000, Judah 74,000, Issachar 54,000, and it just keeps going with all of them. And then they have the alignment of the camps, and they describe how the camps are laid out, because each tribe is their own tribe. And so you have the center, where you have the tabernacle and the sanctuary with the Ark of the Covenant and the meeting tent. And then you have 3 tribes on each side. And they're doing so, it's for the 12 tribes. So there's 3 to the north, to the south, west, and east. And each of these, this is how a war camp would be set up. It's purposely set out with a war camp. So the holiest place, or the place of the king, would be in the center. And then you have these arrayed on the outside. And so this is, Israel is now in war mode. They're in military mode, that we are here to conquer. And of course, this is going to be a literal conquering, because we're going to see it's going to take them a while to get there, but once they get there, it's going to be a literally conquering of the Holy Land. But of course, we still have this idea again in our communion of saints, where you have the church victorious in heaven, you have the church sorrowful, the souls in purgatory, and you have the church militant here on heaven, where we are the Lord of hosts is the God of armies, and so we are the God of armies. Now we don't conquer through swords and bloodshed anymore. No, we conquer through conversion and reason, and through truth and love and all of that fun Christian stuff that we do. And so we're still in a military, because we're still on mission, we're still on campaign, and so we're here to fight against evil. Okay, we're going to skip ahead. If we go ahead to chapter, and we're just going to do a quick note on this. On chapter 4, we have the Kohathites, which are going to be coming to important later. They're a subset of the Levites, and they are not priests of the Levites, but they are part of the Levite clan, and they're going to cause some trouble later on. And we see that the census of the Levites is taken separately. We then and there's a couple of the rules, and you can kind of see how the rules are established as they go and as they need them. And so they have something that comes up. Okay, well, how do we deal with this situation? So in chapter 5, we have it's not the initial concept, but we have the idea of, okay, people can be unclean, and how do we deal with that? And so that ritual uncleanness that we see in Judaism, and what makes you unclean, what makes you clean. We then see how you're supposed to interact with the people. So in 5:5 in Numbers, we see the idea of confession and restitution. So the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites. When a man or a woman wrongs another, breaking faith with the Lord, that person incurs guilt and shall confess the sin and has been committed. The people shall make full restitution for the wrong, adding 1/5 to it, and giving it to the one who was wronged." So we see this idea of making restitution, and that's the idea is, okay, if I've done this much damage, I need to do this much and again. It's not enough to just make up for it. You have to do that much and again. And this idea of publicly confessing it. And this carries on through confession, because even though it's confessed to a priest and it's private and that it's not allowed to be shared, it is still public in that you have to say it out loud. So this, of course, is Jesus saying, confess your sins to one another, and this eventually develops. This is a very uniquely Jewish and Christian idea that you have this public exclamation of your sins, where you admit to your sins, you admit you're a sinner, and it's a very Christian thing. Not all religions, not all cultures do that. It's a very uniquely Christian idea. We then see, we're going to skip ahead to that. Let's go. I don't want to do that. Okay, then we see as they're going to be leaving, and we see on chapter 7, this is another one where it's very repetitive, because all the tribes come up and they offer something for the Lord, and they offer the same sacramental thing. So they offer a silver plate, and they say how much it weighs, and they'll eventually offer a lampstand, and they'll offer a basin, and they'll offer flour. And they're offering these things for the use in the tabernacle and for the use of the priest. And each tribe offers the same thing. And it's so that, okay, we're all in this together. One tribe isn't greater than the other, even if one is larger than the other. We're all offering the same thing. We're all in this together. So it's actually it's a nice little high point that we have. We have the census. They're a big, strong army. We're laid out as we should be. We've all committed to the Lord. We've all given in these gifts. And so now we are in a position to head out. Now, as we all know, the Israelites, it won't last very long, but it starts off nicely. Okay, so they leave in 10, or actually we'll see in 10, 11, we'll see them depart. So in the 2nd year of the 2nd month of the 12th day of the month, the cloud lifted from over the tabernacle of the covenant. And when the Israelites set out in stages from the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. So they've been at Sinai for a while. They were there for a while to get ready. And so now they're finally ready to go. And so they've left. So in chapter 10, they leave. And in chapter 11, I don't know what your title is, but mine is Complaining in the Desert. Well, that didn't take very long. We see complaining in the desert already. So now when the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes, the Lord heard it, and his anger was kindled. Then the fire of the Lord burned against them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Okay. We'll actually see there's going to be a couple more complainings, but I want to point out this too. So we've seen the complainings. Actually, there's 10 major complaints times where we see them do it. And the Lord each time, like Moses goes and asks for forgiveness, basically. And again, God gives them. So when we see the fire burns up, it almost seems like, oh, why is God being so mean? Well, you have to remember, he's given them so many chances. He keeps giving them chance after chance. And ironically, you're also going to see him, when they complain, we're going to see them give them exactly what they want. But here we start, okay, the fire burns out in the outlying areas. So it's a small one. Okay, so he's not starting in the middle, and he's doing the edge. So it's like a warning. Oh, we're grumbling. Okay, you're removing yourself from my love. Bad things happen once that happen. Here's a small case. Please learn from this mistake. It's kind of like, again, you don't want your kid to burn his hand on the stove, but hopefully when he burns, he learns that, oh, I shouldn't touch the hot stove. Some kids, though, reach back and touch it again because they're with something, so it takes them a while to learn. So now we're going to skip down to 11:7. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and the color of it was like the color of gum resin. The people went around and gathered it, ground it in mills or beat it in mortars, then boiled it in pots and made cakes out of it. Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, all of the entrance of their tents. Then the Lord became very angry, and Moses was displeased. So Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you treated your servant so badly? Why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay this burden of this people on me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I give birth to them, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, and nurse carrying a suckling child to the land that you promised an oath to your ancestors, when I am to get meat to give them to all the people? For they come weeping to me and say, give us meat to eat. I am not able to carry this people alone, for they are too heavy for me." So we see we see Moses kind of complain to the Lord. And usually it doesn't go very poorly for him. It's, I often tell people, in your prayers, if you have that moment of like frustration or sadness or anger, bring that to the Lord. And I think you can be free in how you talk to God. God is a big boy. He can take it. And in the same way, you're going to be able to decompress to your best friend or to your spouse in a way you wouldn't to a coworker or someone that you didn't know as well. And they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and they know that you're doing it. So, the same is true for the Lord. So the Lord likes honesty. And so when we see Moses complaining, it's not done out of doubt. It's done out of frustration. So he's and God kind of is there to be his stress relief, kind of. So the Lord said to Moses, "Gather for me the 70 of the elder of Israel, then you know to be of the elders of the people, and offer them up. Bring them to the tent of the meeting, and have them take their place there with you. I will come down and talk with them there. And say to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow you shall eat meat, and you have wailed in the healing of the Lord, saying, if only we had meat to eat, surely it was better for us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall not only eat 1 day or 2 days, or 5 days, or 10 days, or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you, because you have rejected the Lord is among them, and have wailed before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? So I love this where God is like, okay, I'm going to give you what you want. I'm going to give you so much you're sick of it, till it comes out your nostrils. It's such a good visual. And, so then he sends the quail, and they eat, and again, they get sick of that too. And we'll see, actually, he flares up, because there's some people who still complain, and so there's another flaring up. And so, let me see that. Yeah, and so one of the things I've heard, and I have not eaten this much, so I can't complain, apparently quail itself is also such a rich meat that it's one of those ones, it will get terrible if you eat it too much, where it's a delicious meat, but if you can eat too much of it, and it's not good. So it's like one of those, I'm going to give you meat, I'm going to give you really highly prized meat, which is quail, but it's too rich. It's too rich to eat this much of it. So you wanted meat here. And so again, you didn't have to complain. And so we see this grumbling. And so God, okay, so down to 31. Then a wind went out from the Lord, and it brought quails from the sea, and let them fall beside the camp, about a day's journey on this side, and a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, about 2 cubits deep on the ground. That's 2 cubits that's a cubit, is your elbow to your top of your hand. And so 2 things, and there are quails everywhere. It's 2 cubits deep. It's like a meter deep. It's like 5 feet deep. And so it's all of these quail. So the people worked all day and night and all the next day gathering the quails, and least anyone gathered was 10 homers. I have no idea how much a homer is. Some unit of measurement. And they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth, before it was consumed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. So the place was called Kibroth Hattaavah, because they were buried. So God answers the pleas, but still some people who were kind of the instigators, how this is interpreted, or the chief complainers, it still flares up to them. So they get what they want, and it doesn't turn out well for them. Okay, so we've had complaining from the people, and now we're going to get complainer from the leadership themselves. So we're going to see Aaron and Miriam. So in chapter 12, while they were at Hazeroth, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had indeed married a Cushite woman. And they said, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more so than anyone else in the face of the earth. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out, you 3, to the tent of the meeting. So the 3 of them came out. Then the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. And he said, hear my words. When there was a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. Not so with my servant Moses. He is entrusted with all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly, not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. When the cloud went away from over the tent, Miriam had become leprous, as white as snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam and saw that she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, do not punish us for a sin that we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like one stillborn whose flesh is half consumed when it comes out of its mother's womb. And Moses cried to the Lord, O God, please heal her. But the Lord said to Moses, if her father had put spat in her face, would she not bear her shame for 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp for 7 days, and afterward she may be brought in again. So Miriam was shut out of the camp for 7 days, and the people did not set out on a march until Miriam had been brought in again, after the people set out from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. Okay, this is an interesting one where the subtext is, it's obvious if you understand the time and place. So, first of all, in the Hebrew, why is it only Miriam? Well, Miriam is the one who starts this. This is clear in the Hebrew where it says, they have spoken. It's really she has spoken. So she's speaking to Aaron. So Miriam is the one who's starting it. And so the interesting thing is the Cushite woman, the Cushite wife. So Cush is the Nubia. It's the kingdom below Egypt. And so it's the dark-skinned people. So it's an African. And so this can be used as a generic term from anyone who's really dark-skinned. So they would, of course, themselves not be white. They would have been Egyptian or Coptic or things. So they would have been a brown, but this would have been more black. The question becomes, is this Zipporah or is this a second wife? Of course, polygamy was permitted, not necessarily encouraged, but permitted. Most Jewish and Christian scholars read this as Zipporah. Even though she was from Midian, which is in the Sinai region, she would have also been outside a lot more. So either she could have been African and they could have been up here because there was a lot of travel through the Nile. So there was a lot of between Cush, Nubia, and Egypt. So that was quite possible. It could have also been that she was outside so much that her skin was much more darker than some of the Israelites, and so they could have been using it as almost a slang, like she's dark skinned, is just using a generic as dark skin terminology. But most people do tend to identify Zipporah, his wife, and the mother of his 2 children that we know of, with the Cushite. And so the interesting part is we see kind of Miriam complaining about it, and so then what happens to her? She becomes white as snow. So she's complaining about him marrying a dark-skinned woman, and she becomes white as snow. So again, God has a great sense of irony and a sense of humor. It's like you're complaining about her, she hasn't done anything wrong. Here, you're going to be white, so you can learn your lesson. And so this is an interesting one, and it would be less so. This would most likely be less so about race, more so about ethnic tensions, because both Zipporah and even if this is a separate one, Zipporah herself is not of Israel, and so we see. There's always a tension between how do you become part of Israel, and so God is obviously supporting this, that you can become part of Israel, you can become of it through marriage, through because Moses does it and it's supported. So it's kind of this interesting tension, and so we see that like even the siblings are squabbling, and how it's of course this is on a grand scale because they're the leaders of Israel, but how understandable is it to at Thanksgiving complaining about somebody's new girlfriend or something like that. And so it's a very understandable petty thing, but we're not supposed to let our own pettiness come in, and we're supposed to be more than that. So it's kind of that playing out on a grand scale. Okay, in chapter 13, we see them they reach the bottom part of Israel. So, we know they're going to spend 40 years in the wilderness, but it doesn't actually take that long to get there. They get there fairly quickly, and they're entering through the south, so through the desert, in what is the Agreb is what it's called today, in that kind of area where the Sinai meets modern-day Israel, and it's a little bit more of a barren area. And so they're coming up through there, and they send princes, and I love the term they use, reconnoiter. It's not an English term you hear a lot, but it means, again, go and get reconnaissance. But I always just like that term, reconnoiter. And they send 12 princes, and they go in, and prince, again, this shows you prince is just a chief's son. So they're sending out their best, one for each tribe, and they're going to go check out the land. And they go to the land, and they come back with some of the fruit of the land, and they bring in a huge bushel of grapes that they're able to find. And yet they also, when they're saying, oh, this is great, it is indeed flowing milk and honey. But when they find the cities, they find them fortified, which means they're going to be hard to take. And the people are like giants, so they're huge. So they're like, oh, are we going to be able to take these cities? And so they kind of say, no, they're very scared. We're not going to be able to do it, even though they've seen these miracles, even though they've been preparing and they've been in the war camp, and now they're still scared, though. We'll see one of them, but Caleb, so this is 13:30. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. When the men who had gone up with them said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought up the Israelites an unfavorable report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land that we had gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and it is all the people that we saw in it are of great size. There we saw the Nephilim, the Anakites come from the Nephilim, and to ourselves we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. And so and here it translates it as great size. Often you'll see it translated as giants. And some have taken this very literally and means, oh, there were actually giants, like 30 feet tall. No, it means they were really big. I mean, it just means they were taller. So this is one of those ones where it's like we don't have to read in our modern things. Okay, giant means big, so they were really big. And so we were like grasshoppers, and like, okay, so they're good with metaphor. They didn't mean they're, I've seen people actually think, oh, well, we're this proportion, so that means the giants must have. Okay, they were big guys. Okay, just like if you go to Denmark today, they're on average the tallest people in the world. They're like 6'3" is like their average. So yeah, they're really tall. Okay, so they're really scary and they're in big cities and they're tall guys. Okay, so Caleb has the right, and we'll actually see Caleb greatly rewarded for this. Caleb and Phineas and Joshua are like three guys who basically stand up and always have Moses' back and do well, and they're rewarded for it, and they'll make it to the Holy Land. So this is where we'll now go into 14, and the people rebel. So that's not a good title. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people went that night, and the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we have died in this wilderness? Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become booty. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us choose a captain and go back to Egypt. So they want to go back to slavery. This is again, we've seen this theme again, where it's like, sometimes we can look back and you only remember the good things. And you're like, oh, that's good. Or it's easier. It's just like, oh, well, it was so nice back there. And like, you were slaves. You were slaves. Do you not remember that part of it? But we're only remembering the good parts. And so they want to go back. And so we'll see, this is, okay, so we'll see what they ask for. Or would we had died in this wilderness or died in Egypt? Okay, so then of course God gets upset because they're rebelling against the Lord, and he gives them what they want. So they're going to be in the desert for 40 years, and this entire generation will die in the desert. So he said, okay, you want to die in the desert? You want to die in the wilderness? Okay. If you remove yourself from my love, if you remove yourself from my ordinances, if you take yourself out, okay, that's what happens. And again, this is God not being cruel. This is like what happens. This is what happens. You can say the church, when the church has a modern thing that we talk about, and that it's like, okay, well, the church is just mean, or we don't want to have fun. It's like, okay, gluttony. We'll use a small example. Okay, you shouldn't eat an excessive amount, and you should eat healthily. That's basically against gluttony. Okay, well, why does the church care what I eat? Well, because we can see in our modern culture what happens when you eat poorly. We have when you are obese, or when you eat so much you throw up, or when you eat and you get diabetes, and you have we've all seen the consequences of poor diet, and that's a small example. And so it's okay, so you can say God punished that person and made them fat because they ate poorly, or you can also say when you remove yourself from God's ordinances, there has natural consequences. When you do things that are unhealthy spiritually, they're often unhealthy physically as well. So they're going to have to live with their consequences. And again, Moses intercedes for them, and God stays his hand. But again, this is the 10th complaint. Remember I was telling you, so there's the 10 big complaints. This is the 10th complaint. So finally, they've complaining constantly. It would be better that we go back to Egypt. It would be better that we die in the desert. And finally God says, okay, I'm giving you what you want. But I'm still going to be merciful to your children. I'm still going to be true to my covenant, so I'm still going to preserve them, and they're still going to have a chance to enter the Holy Land. Okay, if we go forward to 15. So in 15, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it establishes the penalties for committing a unintended crime versus an intended crime. So if you accidentally do something, you still have to make restitution for it, but you're not cast out in the same way. Now, on the reverse side of that is if you intentionally kill someone, it becomes, usually, and especially in this area, it becomes a death sentence. So if you kill somebody, this is the eye for eye, tooth for a tooth. Okay, if you kill somebody, you're going to get killed. So, in the church we talk about mortal sin. They mean it literally here. They mean literally, but again, the key is you have to do it intentionally. If it's unintentional, if it's an accident, you still have to make restitution, but it's not the same. So it's that distinguishment. And we still have that distinguishment, of course, in the church. You can make a mistake, and it can be wrong, and you might have to make up for it and live with the consequences. It doesn't necessarily means it's sinful. For sin to be, you have to do it on purpose, and you have to know it's wrong and do it anyways. And so we'll see then an example of this. And so the next, in beginning in 32, we'll see this, and it comes up right away. And it says, when the Israelites were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses, Aaron, and to the whole congregation, and they put him in custody because it was not clear what they should be done with him. When the Lord said to Moses, the man shall be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him outside the camp. The whole congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Okay, that seems extreme from our modern perspective. And it is, but it's extreme in a way that you have to understand in the context. So we've just seen the people rebel, and we've seen disaster happen because of it. And God just said, here's the importance of the rules of how we're going to establish justice. And then we see somebody purposely. So we know that he's doing it on purpose because he's doing it in hiding, first of all. And second of all, it had to be intentional because we just established if it was unintentional, it wouldn't have been death. Okay, so he's intentionally gathering and doing this. So is the crime a little bit petty? Yeah, but we just established that you have to respect this. And so this is how serious this thing is. And stoning seems like a really rough way to go, but the idea of stoning is that the community all does it. So it's not one executioner, it's that the community. It's that you've done something to violate the community, and if you violate the community, it has consequences. And it has real consequences. So that's the kind of the point of this. It still can be seen as extreme, and that's okay. Obviously, we wouldn't want to do this in the same way today. But this is again, when you have to establish your rules quick, and in an extreme situation, it's what you have to go by. On the next section, they put fringes on their garments, and that carries on through modern Judaism. And the fringes are a reminder to keep the Sabbath and keep it holy. And we'll see the importance of why to have consequences in the next one. So 16 is one of the I wouldn't say the high point, but kind of the climax of Numbers. If you were doing a movie of Numbers, this would be the big final battle, because we see a revolt happen, and not just like a grumbling, or not just the people saying we're going back to Egypt, but it's actually a revolt. So I'm going to read some of it, but we're going to do it. So now Korah, son of Izhar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, so he's of the Levites. Remember, I talked about the Korahites earlier. And he's a leader among the people, and some other people. They assembled against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far. All the congregation are holy, and every one of them, and the Lord is among them. So why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" Then Moses heard it. He fell on his face. When he said to Korah and all the company in the morning, "The Lord will make known who is his and who is holy, and who will be allowed to approach him. The one who approach he will choose, and he will allow to approach him. Do this, take censers, Korah and all your company, and tomorrow put fire on them and lay incense on them before the Lord. And the man and whom the Lord chooses will be the Holy One." I'm skipping ahead to 15. Moses was very angry and said to the Lord, "Pay no attention to their offerings. I have not taken one donkey from them, and I have not harmed any one of them." And Moses said to Korah, "As you and all your company he presented tomorrow before the Lord, and you and they and Aaron and let each one of you take his censer and put incense in it." Skipping down to 20. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, "Separate yourselves from this congregation, so that I may consume them in a moment." They fell on their faces and said, "O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one person sin, and you become angry with the whole congregation?" And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Say to the congregation, get away from the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram." So Moses got up and went to Dathan and Abiram, the elders of Israel, following him. He said to the congregation, "Turn away from the tents of these wicked ones, and touch nothing of theirs, so that you will not be swept away with their sin." So they went away from the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the entrance of their tents, together with their wives and their children and their little ones. And Moses said, "This is how you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works. It was not been on my own accord. It was if these people die a natural death, or if a natural fate comes on them, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up, then that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol." As soon as he finished speaking all these words, the ground under them was split apart. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, along with their households, everyone who belonged to Korah, and all their gods, so they will and all their goods, so they with all their belonged to them went down alive into Sheol. The earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. All Israel around them fled at the outcry, and they said, "The earth will swallow us too." And fire came from the Lord and consumed the 250 men offering the incense. Okay, so we see a revolution, but it's not a revolution of military or political. This is a theological revolution. This is a schism. And what they're complaining about, remember now we said we've had this now a new established Levitical priesthood, and the Levites are the priests. Now we see the Korah saying, "We are all holy. We are all holy, so why can't we offer sacrifice? You say only you. How come you can only do it?" And what is Moses' response? He goes down in prayer. He goes on his face. And so he says, "Okay, try it." That's basically what he says. If you think you can do it, do it. But you're not going to do it. In fact, you're going to cut yourself off. You're going to cut yourself off. And so it's not because Moses or Aaron are holier. We've seen Aaron mess up plenty of times, but it's about that they've been dedicated for this position. And so they want to establish, basically, this is like a schism. It's oddly similar to the Protestant schism, because in that they said, well, why it's only priests? Why can't anyone do it? Why can't we have these other people do these readings and these things and offer these sacraments? And that's because that's not how God established it. Because God established these people to be set apart in this special way. And so, okay, see, this is the problem is they're thinking from human terms, I have a right to this. Where the real answer is nobody has a right to it. I don't have a right to the priesthood. No, sometimes they're like, oh, men and their priesthood. I'm like, no man has a right to the priesthood. We have the ability to, but we have to be called by God and we have to be approved by the church. The church can reject us for any reason, and they're allowed to, and they do. You know, the casualty rate in seminary is very high on purpose because we don't want just anyone. And so it's in that same thing where it's like, I don't have a right to the priesthood. And you know, any day, even now, even as a priest, I serve at the will of the bishop. And he could remove my faculties tomorrow and I would not be able to do the sacraments. He could. So sometimes we have to be in that position that, you know, just because we want something doesn't mean we get it. So we can do it. And so we'll see this in again with a Protestant. And what happens? Okay, well, I'm going to try to be the priest. Well, you're not serving God then. Because God said, Moses is my guy. And God says, this is how we worship. But you say, oh, well, I want to worship this way. Well, you can do it, but will you be worshiping God? Or will you be worshiping yourself? And so what happens when you do it, you cut yourself off from the community. And so, of course, this becomes an extreme example with the earth opening up and the fire coming down. But again, it's that you're removing yourself from communion with God. So when we see these fiery deaths and we see these things, that's what we have to understand it as. You're removing yourself from the communion and the protection from God. And when you cut yourself off, there's consequences. So on the spiritual level, we'll say in the schism, we can say in our modern ones, like, well, the Protestants cut themselves off, and now they don't have the sacraments in the same way. And of course, they would say they have a different theology about that, and that's fine. We can continue to argue about that, and hopefully we can do it without fire and without the earth opening. But we can do that with love. But it is true that like you cut yourself off. So you know. So there's plenty of examples in your own personal life as well. You know, if you cut yourself off from your friends because you don't like something about it, because they're have more money or a better job, you can be upset about that and then not associate with them. But then you just cut yourself off from the friendship, and that doesn't that doesn't help anyone. So the idea is we don't get to set the terms of the relationship. God sets the terms and we have to abide by it. And there is some truth to that. And now we've seen he's been very merciful and very forgiving and very lenient and very flexible, but you can't do anything. There is going too far. In 17, we see it's kind of a sign for, again, a marking of this true priesthood. We see Aaron's staff blossom. So we've seen miracles with this staff before. In Egypt, we saw it become a snake and defeat the snakes of the Pharaoh, and now we see it blossom. And it's actually very similar to the legend of St. Joseph, who's over here holding lilies because he had a staff and it was supposed to blossom into lilies, and that's why he has associated with lilies. And it's similar to this. Where it blossoms, and again, it's showing that, okay, here is where the true priesthood lies with Aaron. And again, it's not because he's perfect, it's because that's who God has chosen. Okay. So, where are we at here? Okay. I think we're going to do one more thing, and then we're going to stop because we have some other good stuff here, and I wanted to try to get through this, but I'm not going to get through this all tonight. So we're going to do the Waters of Maribel, and then we'll end there. So this is chapter 20. The Israelites, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh. That's right beneath modern Israel, the Holy Land. It's like in Israel, the more south you go, the drier it gets. So this is in the kind of the wasteland underneath the Holy Land. Now there was no water for the congregation, so they gathered together against Moses and against Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had died with our kindred died before the Lord? Why have you brought us to the assembly of the Lord into the wilderness for us and our livestock to die here? Why have you brought us out from Egypt to bring us to this wretched place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron went away from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting. They fell on their face, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, saying, "Take this staff and assemble the congregation and your brother Aaron, and command the rock before their eyes to yield its water. Thus you shall bring water out of the rock from them. Thus you shall provide drink for the congregation and their livestock." So Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock and said to them, "Listen, you rebels, shall we bring water to you out of the rock?" Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me to show my holiness before the eyes of the Israelites, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Maribel, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and by which he showed his holiness." So now we'll see, this is the Moses, and we'll see him not being able to go into the Holy Land. He's going to die right outside, and he's going to be the last one of the generation. And so we see this, that he strikes twice, and that's the issue. He strikes twice, because God says the water from the rock, but he didn't say do it twice. And so this has been interpreted in different ways. One of the interpretations is that he hits it once, and then it doesn't happen right away, so he doubts and hits it again. Another interpretation that is he is being overly angry, and so that's why, again, when he's calling them rebellious, and he hits it twice, and it's kind of like a little egotistical, because look how terrible you are, look how powerful I am, bang, bang. I'm basically calling down God, and now I'm making God at my command. And there's not one interpretation that is perfect, but it's basically, again, Moses showing some doubt. And so it's, part of this is the one generation has to die off so that the next generation can succeed. And there's almost there's a time where you have to realize you don't get to be the leader forever. At what point do you get to step aside and need to let the next person do it? And so this is kind of what that is allowing for. And so I tend to favor the more angry interpretation rather than the doubt interpretation, but either one is legitimate, and there's not an exact, like I said, there's not an exact one. All we know is that they're showing some kind of lack of trust in the Lord, whether that's through ego or through impatience. That's up to your personal interpretation. Okay, we're going to end there. Next week we'll finish that, and we'll pick out some things from Deuteronomy as well. Deuteronomy is kind of a summary of everything else that happened, and so we're gonna get right to the edge of the promised land, and then we'll see. Maybe we'll continue this after Easter, and we'll get Joshua, and as we go into the Holy Land, we'll go into Easter. Maybe we'll see. Okay, let's end in prayer. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. St. Peter. Okay. You all have a very good night, and God bless.